What a privilege it is to be with you today and see so many familiar faces and some new faces. You're bringing back some wonderful memories that I've had traveling throughout Mesoamerica. Just to test our audio, could you give your best smile this morning, just so we can make sure you're hearing? Your best smile. I think it might be a little early for some of you to bring out a smile. There's some. Thank you. Well, this morning, as we've entered into this time, it reminds me of the impact people like you have had in my life. Knowing today is a gathering of people who already have experience in the church, in leadership, in various ways. You have a tremendous impact on the church today and the church tomorrow. And I was reminded, as we were gathering today, that I did not grow up in the Church of the Nazarene. I was reached by the church at the age of 15 through an evangelism strategy, a sports evangelism strategy, and came into the church with very little biblical background, very little understanding of the way Christians thought. I didn't know the songs. I would be with people who would sing these songs they learned as children, these cute little songs that they could sing without any notes in front of them, and I had no idea what they were singing. And I knew that I had missed something very valuable in my life, and that was the shaping, the mentoring along the way. I thank God that people like you came into my life at that age and met me where I was. I couldn't go back and just replace those 15 years and just all of a sudden receive all of this knowledge and experience and relationships. I began very simply, and it was because of people like you. So I thank God for you today. Thank you for being part of this and for the opportunity to share with you today. I want to begin sharing a story from 2 Samuel 12, a story that you are familiar with. And it's a story of King David, king of Israel. And you know that he has had an affair with Bathsheba. And through this affair, David learns that Bathsheba has a wife, or has a husband, Uriah. And David begins to make plans first to bring Uriah home so that he can be with Bathsheba. And because Bathsheba is pregnant from the affair, David hopes that Uriah will think the child is his. That plan does not work. And you know that then David develops a plan to have Uriah killed in battle, and he's successful. And in the midst of this, David's friend Nathan comes and shares with David. And it's 2 Samuel chapter 12. Nathan and David had opportunity to mentor one another. We read about them in the Bible. But in 2 Samuel 12, Nathan comes to David and he says, David, let me tell you a story. There were two men in a town. One is rich, really rich. One is poor. He's very poor. The rich man has a very large number of cattle and sheep. The poor man has nothing except one little baby lamb that he had to pay for. Nobody gave it to him. He didn't have an inheritance. He had to go pay for this little lamb that he hopes maybe will grow up into a sheep one day. And so David's listening to this story from Nathan. And Nathan says to David, David, there's a traveler that comes to this town and he needs something to eat. But the rich man doesn't take one of his own cattle and sheep to give to the traveler. He goes to the poor man who only has one baby lamb who is like a daughter to him. It's very close. He holds the baby lamb in his arms. He talks to the baby lamb. He feeds the baby lamb. This is more than a farm animal. This is like a pet to this man. And the rich man takes the baby lamb from the poor man, and he has it prepared and feeds it to the traveler. Well, at this point in the story, David is obviously becoming upset. Maybe he starts shuffling in his chair. Maybe his face begins to get red. Maybe his eyes begin to glare a little bit. And David seems to interrupt the story. He can't take it anymore. And he says to Nathan, because his anger is become so high, David says, as surely as the Lord lives, this man must die. Who would ever do such a thing? He must pay 4 times over for this thing. This is the terrible thing. This man had no pity. And Nathan's sitting there listening. And I don't know how he said it. I don't know how much time Nathan took to say it. But Nathan finally says, David, you are that man. You're like the rich man. And he goes on to recount the story of Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite. And in this moment, David realizes what he's done. You ever been in this situation where, like David, you're burning with anger and you have this, you can feel it in your head, this burning sensation in your head. And then this sense of conviction where all of a sudden it moves from your head to your heart and your heart is burning and you have this deep, deep sense of conviction. We can see David moving into this moment of conviction. I want you to think about that story as we begin our time today thinking about impact mentoring. And in your participant handbook on page 2, there's just 3 questions. I want you to reflect on this. First, the approach. How would you describe, just very quickly, simply in your own words, how would you describe the approach that Nathan took with David? And question number 2, why do you think this approach was effective? We see the immediate impact on David, the immediate conviction. Why do you think this was effective? And how does this story help you think about mentoring relationships? I'm just going to give you a few minutes to work and answer those questions in your handbook. All right, hopefully you've had time to work through that. This story reminds us of the power of a timely word, the power of a timely word from someone you have a relationship with, and that impacts you, and in this case, changes David's future. When David realizes what he has done, and this brings a different perspective and understanding to David, it's a change in his life. How much better would it have been if Nathan were to be with David before the incident with Bathsheba? Of course, it would have been better. Maybe as we read this story, and we don't know what Nathan saw, but as we begin the story with David, it begins with the words, "It was the time when the kings were off to war." So in the beginning of this story, earlier in 2 Samuel, it says normally David would be off to war, but he's not. He's someplace he's not usually at. He's typically at war. He's at home. If Nathan would have seen that and said, David, there's something different going on in your life. You're typically out to war. You're home. What does this mean? Let's talk about this. Maybe the word would have been different, but it wasn't. And it was the opportunity that David had for Nathan to come and speak to his life and mentor him. As I think about a day like this, there's a statement, a quote that I've heard that has helped me. It says this, and there's a place in your handbook on page 2 to fill this in, that you can count the number of seeds in one apple, but it's impossible to count the number of apples in one seed. And I'm having difficulty with the PowerPoint. If it can be changed and it's following along, go to the next slide. So if you take an apple and break it apart, you could physically pull out every seed and realize how many seeds are there. Easy to do, wouldn't take but a few minutes. You can count the number of seeds in one apple, but you take those very seeds and you plant them in the ground, and they become trees that produce fruit, that creates more seeds that can be planted and produces fruit, that creates more trees. It's impossible to count the number of apples in one little seed. I would think today, many of you are like the one seed. You were the one seed that when planted, nobody could have imagined the impact you've had on the lives of others. You've had countless opportunities through all of your ministry leadership experiences to invest in people who had then invested in people and invested in people. And in that process, that mentoring process, you have shaped a generation of people. So with these ideas, I think about our time together in this class, and what the intent of today is to discover why mentoring is so important to our denomination. And I'm going to share with you first some of our formational information, our doctrinal information that captures very well the importance and the need for mentoring and relationships where we can grow and develop. And then, as we move through our class time today, we're going to look at some of the historic practices of mentoring in the Wesleyan way, and finish with ideas of how you get to the place where you can be like Nathan and David. How do you get to the place with another person where you've earned that right to be heard, where they listen to you, where those words like Nathan spoke to David come with such conviction? Had a stranger said those words to David, could it have been different? Could David have become even more angry and pushed the person away, cast him away? I think the power of those words had to do with the fact that Nathan and David were close and they'd helped each other live well. So I'm going to finish with that. I want to begin looking in there's several places in the manual that I want to look today. And so I'm going to share with you 4 different sections that come straight from the manual. One of them is in the early part of the manual that many people may not read as they skip over to some of the other items in the manual that deal with the local church and the district and the region and the global church. But in our manual, we say this. We talk about the collective Christian conscience. So the manual of the Church of the Nazarene teaches us the importance of the collective Christian conscience. And there's a place in your handbook for that. Collective Christian conscience, as illuminated and guided by the Holy Spirit. What we mean by this, from our earliest days, from the coming together of holiness groups to form the Church of the Nazarene, that we began with several holiness groups coming together and sharing together their beliefs, their values, their views, their understanding, their experiences. From the very earliest days, there was this unifying effect of believers in Jesus, these followers of Jesus, who were pursuing this life of holiness, this higher Christian life. They wanted to be like Christ. And so out of that, we termed this phrase, this collective Christian conscience. It's what happens when all of us come together as a church and to think about our beliefs and our views, and we agree on what they mean to how we should live our lives. I just want you to think for a moment. We won't take time to share here, but because you're here with so many from throughout the Mesoamerica region, I know you've been in places as leaders with people around the world. How has somebody else, when you think about the collective Christian conscience and being with someone from another country, how has someone else shaped you in your view of the church, your view of leadership, your view of leading ministry? How has someone else shaped you? And there's just a little place. I want you to take a few minutes. And over on the right side of page 3, there's a blank column. And I just want you, if you can, name a person, write down their name. Think of somebody. Who shaped you and how? What did they say, or what did they do, or what did you observe that you brought home and it shaped the way you lead today? Can you think of that person and how that happened, what they did? I could share stories with you of people that I'm seeing today on this video. Amazing ways my life is different because of the opportunity I've had to watch others, to be with others, to talk with others. And I'm seeing your names now. You're posting some of those in the group chat. And a wonderful way to acknowledge these people, but to recognize the impact someone else has in our life. And I believe this, without a doubt, you are a person that somebody else would write down because of the leadership capacity that all of you share and the opportunities that you've had. You, at your regional conferences, other events, you've had an opportunity to shape other people. And I thank God for that today. So when we think about the collective Christian conscience, I want you to think about the Church of the Nazarene. And on page 3, I just provided just about the Church of the Nazarene. I think you know this, but in the Church of the Nazarene today, did you know that now we're in 164 world areas? 164 world areas. We just entered a new world area this year. Did you know that we now have 492 districts around the world? That we now have 2.6 million Nazarenes around the world? That we have 22,000 organized churches and another 10,000 churches that are not yet organized. They're a church plant. They're on their way. 32,000 churches, 22,000 organized, 10,000 not yet organized. But we're unique in our approach, that we bring representatives from all of these world areas together, and this will happen in 2023 again. Nearly 4,000 leaders elected to serve in conventions and a general assembly. They will come together, and what do? We consider our collective Christian conscience. Together from all over the world, we come together and we think together how we best organize to live our lives. Out of that comes the manual that we're going to look at other sections today. But I think that's a powerful 3 words, that we are rooted in a collective Christian conscience. None of us can just rely on our own thinking. We don't need to do that. A district superintendent doesn't need to rely on their own thinking. None of our leaders do. None of our pastors do. We have a collective Christian conscience, and we're going to look at that material today. When I think about impact mentoring, and I think about our doctrinal formation, I think about this collective Christian conscience that together, 2.6 million people, represented by 4,000 leaders, that together have helped shape what's important to us. They've said, if you're going to focus on anything, focus on these things, and they've identified them for us. And we're going to look at it today. We're going to look at some areas. I'm going to ask you to do some individual work, and then we're going to put you into small groups after you do the individual work. And we're going to take moments to reflect on these different areas. What does our doctrine have to do with impact mentoring? The first section that I want to look at there, section 2, the covenant of Christian conduct. Bottom of page 3, beginning there, you have in your participant handbook, word for word, what comes out of the manual of the Church of the Nazarene, the conduct of Christian conduct. This speaks to our behavior as believers. So what I'm going to do is give you 5 minutes, read through that section. I want you to underline the words, and you'll see the questions now on the screen that you're going to answer. So these questions will help you underline your words. But when you're done underlining these words and reading through this, you're going to answer these questions as a group. So underline the words that speak to us about God's design for mentoring. What are the things that are important to us about behavior? And circle them or underline them. And then when 5 minutes are done, I'll ask the administrator of this to put us into our groups, give us 20 minutes in group time, and in your own groups, manage your discussion to make sure that many have the opportunity to be involved. Answer those 3 questions at the end of the 20 minutes, then we'll come back together. So I'll now ask you to enter into that exercise. Very good. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for sharing in your groups. Sorry, I'm sure we interrupted some very profound statements being communicated in your small group, and you were just about the crescendo of your point, and we pulled you out of your discussion. That's what happens typically in my small groups, but thank you for sharing. I think when we talk about a collective Christian conscience, this section helps us provide meat to that. It gives us depth to that. And so as you looked at the section, you would have found these words. The covenant of Christian conduct talks about yearning for connection with others, living in covenanted relationship with God, the creation, loving one's neighbor as oneself, that we reflect the image of God in our capacity to relate and our desire to relate, part of the collective Christian conscience. This section also talks about being the fact that the people of God are formed, that we're to be a rich community of love and grace, that believers are called to live as faithful members, and that we are to engage as Jesus did in the intimacy of community, surrounded by friends, welcoming and being welcomed to tables and expressing faithful witness. Now, this section of the manual is relatively new to our over 100-year journey. When I became part of the Church of the Nazarene, this would have been a wonderful section for somebody to sit me down and say, Gary, this is the vision we have. These are when we talk about the Nazarenes, this is who we are. We are connected. We are invested in one another. We are shaping and being shaped with one another. We together, collectively, live out this Christian conscience. Our beliefs, our values, our behaviors, our perspectives. This all comes and is stated in this section of the manual. I pray that it's true. When we think about impact mentoring, when we think about being in a relationship with another person or a small group of people, this is a wonderful place to start. To say, this is our dream. This is the vision. When we're finished with this conversation today, I hope we can go through and say, yes, yes, yes. All of these things became true in our meeting today. They're things that cannot be accomplished by any one person. It requires the body of Christ working together to accomplish these things. It's the beauty of how we function in the Church of the Nazarene. Even though we're in 164 world areas, we believe this. We believe that throughout the world we can live this way. And as we mentor leaders in this way, when we mentor young believers in this way, it's the foundation that all else comes from, because this gives us the witness. This gives us the testimony. This gives us the opportunity to give feedback to other people, to say, this is what I think, and this is what I understand. Help me here. So someone like Nathan can come into my life, and maybe through the telling of a story or through whatever fashion is most appropriate, help me to be a better follower. It's our covenant of Christian conduct. So thank you for sharing that. So we have another section in the manual that's relatively new for us. And along the same lines, it's a covenant, and it's the covenant of Christian character. So the covenant of conduct is about our behavior. Character is about how we live and the how people view us. Are we truthful? Are we honest? What is our character? And so this section is longer. So this first section was an introduction for us. It was very easy to read, some really nice words to underline or circle. This gets a little more complex in that there's several concepts identified in the covenant of Christian character. But in your handbook on page 4 and 5, you'll see this, and the document actually is on page 5, 6, and 7. So it's more lengthy to read through. So again, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to read through this. I want you to circle, to underline those areas. I want to bring up the questions again. So when we're done going through this personal exercise of underlining and circling words, we're going to put you into small groups to discuss again. And in your small groups, I want you to answer these questions. So as you think about what to circle or underline, I want you to answer, how have you been mentored to learn these character qualities? Or have you? Did anyone mentor you? Did anybody intentionally engage with you to help you to adopt these kinds of characteristics in your life? And then a follow-up question to that, how would you change the way you were mentored? If you could go back, what would you change about that? And the last question, how would you incorporate these character qualities into a mentoring relationship today? So based on the content that's there, your own experience, how does this impact the way you would mentor someone today? What would be important to you to communicate these? So this is a longer section. Again, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Go down, circle, underline those words. When the time comes, the administrator will put you back into the small groups for the 20 minutes, and you'll answer these 3 questions. So let's enter into this exercise. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for your discussion in your groups. And again, I'm sure you needed more time to talk thoroughly about the content, but I hope that you had some good sharing and an opportunity to give some of your thinking, but also to be impacted by the thinking of others. As we think about these 2 pieces and our collective Christian conscience, the fact that we're shaped by others, and that's in the organizational DNA of our denomination, is that we believe in this collective Christian conscience. The conduct gives us the foundation of our desire for connection, that we're better when we're connected with others. It emphasizes that. The section you just looked at now on character gets into specifics. When we think about mentoring someone, when we think about being mentored ourselves, what do we mean? What is it about our doctrine that matters for mentorship? And so how would our lives be different if we were to take these areas? You could create at least 16 different discussions if you just took these points individually. What would it look like if in our development as a leader, as your development and my development, if I would have had the opportunity to sit with someone as a young leader and for them to walk down through this and say, Gary, let's just talk about these things. And we'll take time for each one to talk about what it means to your life right now, your past experiences, what life may bring in the future, given your ministry responsibility. What would life had looked like for me if someone would have sat down and mentored me in this kind of way? I did not receive that kind of mentoring. I hope that you did, but you may not have either. I did not have someone that sat me down and was invested enough to give me some personal attention, to speak directly with me, to build the kind of relationship where I would have wanted to hear from that person and be shaped by that person. So as we went through this section, there was a lot that you saw here. The desire for us to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbors, ourselves, witnessing to the unsaved, being courteous, being helpful, seeking to do good, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked. These are really important things, but it goes on. There's more. To visit the sick and imprisoned, to minister to those who have needs around us, to contribute and support the ministry in our local church, to attend faithfully the ordinances, to be part of communion, the Lord's Supper, of scriptures, daily devotions, how important that is. And then some of the ways that we interact with others, avoiding evil of every kind. And you see those items listed there that seem to be common around the world. They're not unique to any one world area. You can go to any world area and likely these items are in that culture. And these items are important for us. And maybe there's some variances, but through our collective Christian conscience, I think we've identified some very important areas to focus on. So what would it have looked like if someone would have mentored you, mentored me in a way that we could have talked through each of these points? I would suggest even saying, break them down individually, take your time, don't rush through them too quickly. It's not about educating a person to try to memorize the list. It's about application. It's about applying these to my life. What does this mean to me? And how does this impact the way that I should live? It's part of our doctrinal formation and how we can have an opportunity to impact others. So we've looked at this collective Christian conscience, this idea that 2.6 million Nazarenes can have a voice in articulating what is important to us. What does the scripture call us to do? What does the scripture call us to be? And how do we apply that to our lives? And these areas, the covenant of Christian conduct, the covenant of Christian character, are two ways that help us do that. Well, we've reached the point in our time that we're going to take a break. We're going to break for 10 minutes. And when we come back together, we're going to look at one more section of the manual that speaks to our doctrinal formation and a key section of the manual that helps us understand the role of mentoring and how we view that as a denomination. And so let's take a 10-minute break, and we will come back together. Thank you.